Hi, my name is Noah Latte from Instinct Hub, and in this short video, I'll be showing you some simple tips about user experience design. So basically, we'll be covering, talking about wireframing, mockups, and prototype. So it's gonna be an interesting video, so stay by. Basically, in case you've been wondering whether you have a background in design or not, the good news is this is meant for everyone. You do not really need to have any design background. But however, if you have, learned about design before, or you currently, do some sort of design, it will be really helpful. But whichever way, you don't have to really know anything about design in order for you to watch this video. So stay tuned. So talking about user experience design, I'll try as much as I can to, try to explain it in a very little instances so that we can all grasp what I'm talking about. So user experience design is basically the process of creating interface and connection of an application or a web. So what does that mean? So before a website is created, there's actually a need for people or designers to understand what needs to be done. So from the user going to the website to clicking a button, from clicking a button to gathering some of the item or ordering online, some of those things really need to be understood before the software development. And that's basically where the user design or where the user experience design come to play. So simply put, when you're thinking about user experience design, you're more or less thinking about, oh, okay, so how can I implement everything or cater for everything that the user will be requesting from the website? I know some might be wondering whether because of the educational background, the cool thing is you do not really need to have a technology certification in order for you to be a user experience design. In as much as you have passion and you're ready to pay attention to some of the principles, then this actually be worthwhile. But if you think you basically, you're just interested in how the things work, is also a plus. So the truth is, it is actually difficult to find someone with the entire skills. But what is common is for you to find someone with a specific skill. So basically, you do not really need to know how to build a product or maybe build a website from start to finish. But basically, one thing you can do is you sort of need to like put your ideas together and start from a bit. So take for instance, if you start from the user design side, then at some point when you get bored, you can basically move to coding it. So take for instance, you build or design a web page and it looks good and you feel like, oh, it's time for me to kind of like learn how to make it coded, and that's basically how it starts. So don't think about you knowing everything. At the same time, always be hungry to know more. Whether you're looking to become a UX designer or you can't really afford to hire a UX designer, or you just feel like, or you're interested in how the design world works. This is actually, so UX design is something you want to pay attention to because it will pay off at long run. One thing I actually want you to remember is just three things. I want you to remember that user experience design is an act of finding answer. Another thing I want you to not forget is the design process defines the order of which questions need to be asked. So as a user experience design, you basically is your role to kind of like figure out how questions will be asked. The last one is it's help you to really know the questions to ask. So when you put all of these things together, you basically understand that it is a very crucial part of the product design or um, web application process. So basically, what you're thinking about is you need to be able to answer questions with your visualization. So take for instance, somebody goes to a website and the person is curious about getting some things done. You need to be able to, it is your job to make sure that the user can easily navigate and see those things. Now, it is your job to make sure that crucial questions are tabled to either the development team or the design team. It is your job as well to design means of, describing the solution of some of those questions that are raised. If you have passion about learning how to create a web design, it is very key for you to understand the fundamentals. It is really very key because that's something that will pay off at the long run. So if there's anything you need to really take seriously, is how to understand the fundamental of some of those things. Because a good design experience is that make life easier for the user. I mean, there are so many tons of websites out there which are really, not user-friendly. But it is a job of a web designer or a user experience designer to make, all of those things easier to navigate for the user. Understanding UX is basically understanding how to create a website. And understanding to create a website means understanding the fundamental. So it's not all about creating something that is beautiful, aesthetically okay. Nah. It is all about creating something. Just look at it as an avenue to solve users' problem. Be it an e-commerce website, be it a resume website, whatever it is. Let your focus be on how to help people navigate the content that needs to be seen and how they can interact with the content. So basically now is where we actually headed. Some might be wondering, like, what is wireframing? It sounds like wire. Frame for picture? Maybe. Okay. So wireframing basically, just like it sounds, is some sort of connections between the app. Wireframing is basically what helps us to understand when the whole thing is still dark, when there's really no self-explanatory documentation to show us what needs to be done. It is wireframing that helps us to kind of like, sketch out what needs to be done. It describes our design even before we, put our pen on the paper. It is wireframing that helps us to, map out some of the basic components that needs to be included, from images to links to buttons to just name it. Whatsoever that is interactive on the web, it is wireframe that help us to like think about them and imagine them before we now move to mockups. So basically mockups is like kind of, more beautiful, I'll put it that way, than a wireframe. Why wireframe looks like a skeleton, right? A mockup is a visual way to kind of like describe what you're talking about. So see like a form of designing a flyer, but you're not designing a flyer, you're kind of like maybe designing something for the web. So maybe why flyer doesn't really have a button, then your web have a button. So that's basically the way it is. And that's what to look forward to when it comes to mockup. So wireframing mostly represents the product structure, right? A mockup, show how a product is going to look. So how you want people to kind of like see it, with the color of the button be red, pink, yellow, however you say it, but that's just it. So, but still, a mockup is not really clickable. Despite the fact that it's looking good, it is not clickable. So that's downside of the mockup. So that is now leading us to prototype. Yeah. So we've talked about wireframing, we'll talk about markup. Now we're talking about prototyping. So prototyping is a very high fidelity stage of design that help us to really, kind of like simulate the integrations. So what I'm trying to say is a stage that help us to kind of like add interaction. We can, make it clickable, so we can make it. So let's look at it this way. Prototype is actually the combination of wireframe and mockup. So why wireframe makes you understand the connections between your application, right? Prototype helps you to kind of like, okay, you can see the interconnection between the application. At the same time, you can kind of like click and it works. Not really that it works, but at least you can kind of understand what application you're building. So when user click on this button, this is where they get to. So, unlike the previous two, a prototype is clickable and it allows user experience to, have interaction with what the app is going to look like. In fact, prototype is a very much like the final product. Does that make sense? I think so. Okay, so moving forward, I want us to, so I've kind of like broken this down: wireframe, mockups, prototype, right? So just play around with the infographics. I believe that once you're able to memorize all of this, you will feel good and do better. There are so many tools out there that can be used to create some of these things. There are tools. Sometimes I think the most cheapest way of creating some of this is with a pen and paper, which is mostly used in the wireframing segments where you use your pen and paper to just sketch. There are so many online tools that is capable of helping us to amplify some of these things, and some of them are, you will see Busmeek. You'll see, I've listed them for you. I think some of the most common ones that most developers kind of use. You'll see Figma, you see UX, Adobe UX, you'll see InVision, you see Flinto, and so many of them. I added a link in the descriptions to kind of like give you a top 10 wireframing tools from concepts blog post. I think if you read it, it's really help a lot in deciding which to kind of use in your future project. Talking about the tips of wireframing, prototyping, and mockups, there are just 5 things on my list which is worth noting. And one is, don't reinvent the wheel. It is very important. Don't try to overdo. For instance, instead of designing your menu at the top where users can navigate, don't try to put it at the bottom. When users get to the page, they already kind of like have understanding of how some of this platform work. So the moment you try to, change the positioning and all of that, you're kind of like stressing the user. And that doesn't make sense. Another thing is, maybe for instance, you want to add an icon to your page. It is best practice to, put your icons before the text, or put your icon before the element and all of that. Because that's the conventional way. So you're trying to turn it upside down. It might look beautiful to you, but the question is, who are you really building this platform for? If it is the user is already used to a particular form, and you need to give them the way they really understand if you really want your app to be user-friendly. Another thing is, Keep it simple. Don't add so many colors. Don't add so many images. That's not really what matter. What really matter is how is your product or is your design actually achieving the aim. And the aim is kind of like, passing a particular information to the user. So every other thing that you add is secondary. And once something is secondary, let it be secondary. Another thing on my list is understand your audience. Take, for instance, if you're designing for a bank, you know the kind of people, the caliber of people, which means people who are in the financial space and want to make some sort of money and all of that. You design for them. If you are designing for a church, you need to understand your audience because that will play a very, very vital role. Number 4 is make every visual element distinct. Don't try to kind of like manage space and sort of like manage your design. All you need to do is make sure everything you're designing is standing out in such a way that users can end up, understanding or getting the right information. That doesn't mean that you have to increase everything to the fullest. No. It means if you have to, group your design into sections, group your elements into sections and all of that. Maybe you use a color pattern repetition on the header, then maybe the body have boxes and all of that. Just make sure that everything you're doing is distinctive enough for clarity and visibility. The last one on my list is maintain consistency. It is very important. So from the beginning, if you're going to be using bold font for the header 1, stick to it. If you're going to use a particular font color for header 2, stick to it. If you're going to use a color shade from the beginning, from finish to start, stick to it. Don't do things randomly because you think they are okay. So you need to kind of like pay attention to some of the colorings, pay attention to some of the spacing, and see how your design resonates with the visual and your audience. And that's basically the end of my tip for today. If you've learned one of two things in this short video tips, so just like this YouTube channel and follow us on all our social media handle. See you soon.